Hi everyone, my name is Maelis and I am the managing partner at Catalyst Fund. It's a pre-seed venture fund and accelerator that wants to build the resilience of climate vulnerable communities across Africa. So this is obviously a topic very dear to my heart and the work that we've been doing for now several years. And I'm really excited to have an amazing panel of innovators who are leading the climate transition on the continent or investing in building ventures on the continent. So before actually I let them introduce themselves and what they do, and that might give Aisha the time to get here on stage, I'll give you a little bit of context. I mean, we heard from Martin's brilliant keynote presentation that climate tech has enormous potential on the continent. Climate tech globally, just last year, raised over $100 billion. And overall, the market is $1 trillion opportunity. But obviously, in places like the US and Europe, the attention is mostly on reducing emission, racing to net zero, whereas in Africa, the continent that has contributed to maybe 3.8% of global emission, the challenge is different. The challenge is how you adapt entire economies, entire sectors for a more climate positive future and a more resilient future. And so here we have panelists that are going to tell us about this in the context of food systems, in the context of energy systems, of ag supply chain, and mobility. And that's what's exciting to me, because the potential is unlimited and is extremely untapped, yet the talent is there, and we have the opportunity here for African innovators not to be, as you said, a climate victim, but climate vanguards, and taking this innovation in their own hands to really be world global leaders in climate change solutions. So, you guys obviously have recognized this opportunity a long time ago when you decided to build your ventures. And I'm going to start with you, Claire, telling us a little bit about what you're building in the food systems and what motivated you to address this problem in particular.
Yes, microphone is on this side. So what motivated me is really seeing this crazy problem that we're facing with food systems. So at the one hand, in sub-Saharan Africa, 50% of fruits and vegetables never reach the consumer, 50%. Of course, there's a huge paradox that 1 out of 3 Kenyans faces food insecurity, and that farmers are putting capital in the ground and they're unable to sell their produce because it looks different. And for climate change specifically, 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions comes from food waste. And this is a hugely under-communicated problem. A lot of people don't know that 10%, which is 6 times more than the global aviation industry, comes from rotting food. Food that rots releases methane, and methane is 30 times more potent than CO2. So the whole food system, the way we look at food, the way it's been channeled, it has to transform in order to fight climate change. So that's a huge paradox. So that paradox motivated me to start Farm to Feed. Farm to Feed aggregates imperfect and surplus produce and repurpose that into the market. So we have tapped into this huge market of customers that actually don't really care if it's a smaller carrot or a perfect looking carrot, if they're processing it or if they provide them with a lower cost produce so that they can increase their margins, and especially if they can have quantifiable environmental impacts. So we are working with Vera, Wageningen University, to actually say if customers order 1,000 kgs of broken carrots, what is the actual carbon avoidance that they are achieving. And the world is going to this direction. We were just listening to Martin. People want to have this impact. We want to work towards changing something. Companies want to do it, business wanting to do it. So it's trying to make it easy for them as well, and tangible.
Fantastic, Claire. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's going so far, what you're seeing from the market, what the demand has been?
So it's been really good. We've had quite rapid growth so far, and we've onboarded different types of customers. So customers that are really interested in a lower cost produce, so really tapping into the food security aspect of what we're facing, but also customers that really want to contribute to climate change. So part of our customers are the Art Cafe. We have airlines being very interested in the produce. So it's been very, very exciting to work with our customers on this problem, because we really see it as a partnership as well, that we have to transform this whole food system across the continent. We've built our platform, scaled to 6,000 farmers on the platform, and I think additional to what's really important is that we're not just a marketplace where we're buying and selling produce, but it's also really understanding what are the drivers of food loss. So the people that know the problem of 50% of fruits and vegetables are lost and wasted, we repeat this mantra, but we don't actually know where, which seasons, which value chains, why. Is it because of bad inputs, poor quality? Is it because of rains? Is it because of droughts? Is it because soil degradation? Is it because of lack of market access? And we usually have these food loss interventions and we just spread them out across the continent. But it's very, very different in every specific region, and that very granular localized data we are collecting, and it's been very interesting because we're getting a lot of interest in terms of what are those future interventions needed in these different areas. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you, Claire. We're gonna get back to this point about how she's building a locally based solution really adapted to this market context and how that might scale in other countries. But let me go back to another company. Maybe I need to move the microphone over here. That is also building a new venture in the ag space, also with a supply chain vision. So Aisha, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone and also tell us a bit more about Farms to You?
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm co-founder and CEO of Farms to You. We are building the operational engine for farmers to better connect with buyers and suppliers in the agricultural supply chain in Africa. We believe Africa's, and really it's not just unique to the continent, it's something that we've seen in other regions, but we are solving the problem for the continent. But the agricultural supply chain is broken. Similar to what Claire just said, we often focus on the challenge of production, that we're not producing enough, but production is not as big a problem as distribution. And that's essentially what we are addressing as a business, where we're using tech-enabled solutions to better connect farmers to capital, things that essentially would enable them scale their production capacity, and also better connecting buyers. So these are like FMCG companies, processing companies that need to source products, but it's very difficult to do so. I'll give an example of Nestle in Nigeria. So we have operations in both Nigeria and Kenya. But if I use Nestle as an example, they have a product called Golden Morn. It's mostly made of maize. And despite there being sufficient production in Nigeria of maize that could fulfill their requirements, it's very difficult for them to access it in a timely way for their production needs. So these are some of the challenges that we seek to address by better connecting buyers to farmers through aggregators, and using just that tech-enabled approach to mitigate the risk that we see on the supply chain.
Great, Aisha. And so when you think about optimizing the ag supply chain, what is the climate lens like on your business model?
Yeah, so it's always been ingrained in what we're doing, and I know that climate is become a hot topic, but it's always something that we've seen as a challenge for the farmers that we work with. I'll give an example that is a bit of an oxymoron, where in Nigeria we had some farmers that were suffering from floods. So between October and the Q3, third quarter and fourth quarter of last year, Nigeria saw its heaviest rain in a decade, and that actually eroded a lot of farms. On the flip side, for our farmers in Kenya, Machakos, they had droughts. So someone has too much water, another person has too little water. And we see this trend only continuing, and the important thing for us to do there is to look for ways to mitigate the risk on the farmer. So if I give the example of some of the farmers that we're working with that we're impacted by the flood, because of how our product is designed, insurance was mandated as part of their production costs, so they were actually covered for the losses from the flood. I think those sort of conversations where the risk is mitigated and shared across the ecosystem, we're having conversations about the impact of the droughts, not having certainty of what the rainfall, because Africa is still very much rain-fed agriculture. We don't have greenhouses as you would see in the Netherlands. So I think, climate is part and parcel of what we're doing, and the idea is how do we look for intelligent ways, things like insurance, things like also regenerative practices to mitigate the risk that farmers are only going to continue to face.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way to look at it, and something that at the Catalyst Fund we also think deeply about, like how might we add other services that can provide an added protection, like for whether it's farmers or small businesses, crop insurance, yield area insurance being a clear value add in your case, right, in addition to credit. And it's interesting how a lot of players in this ecosystem are actually thinking about embedded fintech, and I think Lyndsay might comment on that later as well. But going to another major industry you've just heard about, but we're going to hear more deeply about the business model. Duncan, tell us a bit more about how Octavia works, what motivated you personally to tackle this challenge. I know you have an incredible personal story as well, and how it's going so far.
Thank you, Maelis. So I'm Duncan Kariuki from here in Kenya, and my background is in mechanical engineering. I come from a small community, a farming community in the Kenyan highlands near Mount Kenya, at the foot of Mount Kenya. And basically how I got into the space of direct air carbon capture is I started out thinking about this when I was in university with one of my colleagues. We're now colleagues, but then we're just mechanical undergraduate students. And we were thinking about how best can we build something as a school project, but can have a lasting impact. And I'm from a farming community, so we see climate change every day. You heard Martin talking about our parents lacking water. That's in the highlands where there's supposed to be plenty of water. And given that I see climate change there, I thought maybe one of the easiest projects to do would be to reverse climate change. And yeah, you can laugh at me now, it's quite tough. So because of my engineering background, I went to engineered CDR, solve the problem at its core. What's causing climate change? It's CO2. Let's remove that CO2 from the atmosphere. And that's basically my story. We met Martin through some online community of like-minded thinkers, and the rest is history. So as Martin had said, Octavia Carbon builds machines that can filter carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now this carbon dioxide can be used for anything like utilization by welders in fizzy drinks like your sodas and beers, or even as an industrial input. But why we really care about it is we can store this carbon dioxide underground, and it can be stored in basaltic rocks, which are basic rocks. Carbon dioxide is slightly acidic, and so you mix it with water, pump it underground, and essentially what we can do is remove the carbon that we got from the ground and put in the air and return it back to where it's supposed to be, and doing so have an impact on our planet. And really, it's not to say that we should stop or slow down decarbonization because we have this technology. We're saying that we have to do all of this at once. We reduce our emissions, we decarbonize, and we remove the CO2 that we put in the atmosphere. And on the second question of how Octavia works, we are an 8-month-old company. Currently, we are building our second commercial machine. Currently, our machines are going to in what is called carbon to value, where we build products that from air captured CO2 and actually creating value, like things like diamonds or plastics. And really that's allowing us to focus on building the machines and scaling that up as we bring the cost down. But really what we want to do here in Kenya is building these machines at scale and deploying them to capture the carbon dioxide and store it underground.
Fantastic, Martin. I mean, this story for me is just, every time I hear it, I'm more and more impressed by the potential of it. I mean, it can be transformational for the continent. And it's so great that smart people like you guys are tackling head on in Africa. So let's shift gears a little bit, because we've heard from 3 fantastic solutions, and spoiler alert, obviously Catalyst Fund is an investor in all of them, so that's why I'm extremely excited about them. But let's look at the market in its entirety. I mean, obviously there's solutions emerging, but overall, there's so much more to build, and there's not enough. Like, this is an emerging space, it's growing fast, but it's certainly one where the opportunity still needs to be captured. So players like Lyndsay are actually helping continue to fill that gap and creating more ventures. So Lyndsay, tell us a bit about why you think there aren't enough solutions today, and what is Factory doing to address this gap in particular, and then maybe a bit also about what sectors you're particularly most excited about.
Great, thank you. Well, I just have to say it's such an honor to be on a panel with 2 female founders. So if any investors out here are wondering where they are, come and find them. And other really innovative African entrepreneurs tackling climate change. So thanks for putting this together. And so I'm Lyndsay. I'm a partner at the Factory Group. And the Factory Group, our mission is to increase incomes and tackle climate change by investing in technology-enabled ventures in energy, agriculture, and mobility sectors. Across each of those, we also look for innovative embedded fintech solutions that are looking to advance those sectors or access to solutions in those sectors. And, you know, Factory is a really interesting group. It started with an early stage seed capital fund, which is a permanent capital vehicle, and we invest in pre-seed companies through that vehicle. And in 2022, we decided to expand the Factory Group to include a new Series A fund called Equator that will invest in companies that are looking to really start to grow and scale, proven solutions with traction. And on the other end, we also decided to build a new venture studio where we will actually start to work with founders from the idea stage and internally create new solutions and business models to tackle climate change and increase incomes and fill gaps that we see in the ecosystem. So today we can kind of support and invest in founders from idea all the way to Series B. And I think specifically why we decided to kind of look more at venture building is really kind of 2 reasons. One is that actually there are a lot of amazing founders on the continent that want to build in the energy and ag sectors especially, but have said to us that it is very difficult to raise your angel round or your pre-seed round in these sectors. So I like talking about this through some stories and feedback from our own entrepreneurs. In 2022, we did a call for co-founders in energy and agriculture. And we were especially excited to connect with African and female founders who are underrepresented in these sectors. And we spoke to over 100. And one of the things we heard over and over again was that a lot of these founders want to build in these hard sectors. But what they say is, we build in fintech because we can raise $50,000 and we can get an MVP off the ground. And we can raise more money for that to grow that over time. It is much harder to raise in these other sectors, but we are really passionate about solving the problems our parents face in the ag sector, that bringing clean, affordable energy to rural households. So what I feel is there is an actual strong interest in founders out there that already have problems they want to solve and ideas and the talent to solve them, but they do need the right capital and support from that early stage to actually start building and seeing the traction they need by Series A when when they're pitching these other investors. So we built the studio really to just support a lot of the founders that are already out there. And also, finally, I'll say that I think a lot of us entrepreneurs and investors in the sectors, we see these gaps in the ecosystem, that if they're not filled, it's hard for others to succeed. And that's why we see so many companies becoming vertically integrated. But I think that if we can think more holistically in an ecosystem level, and talk to entrepreneurs, investors, hey, what companies could be built so you don't have to recreate every wheel? We're also seeing a lot of successful growth stage startups like Mcopa and Greenlight Planet and Market Force and Paystack. They're now in a position to do M&A. And so how can we help build some of the solutions that some of these growth stage companies need to bring these climate solutions to scale is something we're passionate about doing with the venture studio model. So I'll pause there.
That was great, Lyndsay. And maybe not everybody in the audience is familiar with the venture studio model, so could you help demystify a little bit what that means? Like, how do you exactly work with founders that you recruit? Like, what kind of support and is constant support you provide to them so that they're ready, as you say, for those later stage growth company or corporates?
Yeah, so there's no one definition of the venture studio, so I'll just kind of share a general kind of definition that we believe in. You know, a venture studio aims to bring together meaningful capital, innovative ideas. Those could be technologies or innovative business models and great talent together to increase the speed and scale of venture building. And I will say that it's, you know, I think it's similar to an accelerator, and there's probably a lot of overlap, you know, between the two. But I think the venture studio model is looking to, in many cases, probably invest and support the ventures for longer. So in our studio, we will support founders up to 24 months. Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is one of the largest climate investors in the US, they have a 24-month venture building. So we kind of believe it takes more than 3 to 6 months to really get these early stage tech ideas off the ground. So we offer longer support. We're also looking at shared services. You know, a lot of companies need a CFO, a great CTO, especially in these climate sectors. We need experts with deep domain expertise, and startups can't afford that. So the studio model is looking to bring that in-house for longer. And I'll just say a final thing, because I was an entrepreneur before I was an investor. And the venture studio really helps entrepreneurs raise capital. We spend a lot of time helping our companies raise capital so the founders can focus on the business, which is what they should be doing, because right now founders are spending more than 60% of their time fundraising, and we need them to be spending time fundraising. So we aim to do that as well.
Amen to that. I think that's something that actually Catalyst Fund and Factory have very much in common. We, at a later stage, also have something we call venture building, but a different notion of it. That's why I'm saying there's a wide range. But providing exactly that additional support, very hands-on, very bespoke, building alongside the founders, because capital often is not enough, like at the early stage. It's really the combination of both, which is super powerful. So that resonates a lot. So actually focusing on two of the things that you mentioned, I'm actually going to jump to an interesting question, which is the question of where does the technology innovation come from? And we've often asked this question, like in climate tech, are we actually taking technology innovations from the US that are being proven and tested there and taking them to Africa, across the continent, and finding applications here, obviously tailoring them? Or are we like developing solutions that are, you know, fit for purpose and homegrown, and, you know, it's really built and developed here? So Duncan, for example, in your case, like I know DAC solutions existed before, and they were tested and raised like a lot of money in the US, and often criticized for their high cost. So what makes it worth it to actually build it here? What will bring down the cost, in your opinion? What's your opinion basically on this question of building it for purpose, or sort of taking something and adapting it?
Well, yes, it's true that dark CO2 is expensive right now, but dark is a nascent industry. It's the first large-scale installation plant or removal plant was launched in 2021, or was opened in 2021. And that was in Iceland. But really, yes, the technology is there, but the technology, dark has it's not only a technology problem, we also need capacity to build. And that's really our goal here at Octavia. we can look at industries like solar. Solar is the best case scenario. 20 years ago, solar was expensive, and it took a few decades, but solar is the cheapest form of energy right now. And DAC is at the same stage solar was 20, 25 years ago. And by leveraging global supply chains, like what China did for solar, we here at Kenya and East Africa and Africa in general can do the same for climate tech industries. And really, the focus is to build, there is excess demand for air captured CO2, then there is supply. And that supply shortage is because we've not set up the manufacturing, we've not set up the supply chains to build this industry. And so as we do that, as we set up these global supply chains, we'll be able to bring the cost down over the next decade or two. And really, the other thing is, on your first question of why deploy it here in Kenya, it's just as Martin stated, if you want to do carbon dioxide removal and you store it, it's location specific. And luckily here in Kenya, we have a trifecta of factors that really make this the best place to do it. We have the storage locations, the rocks that you can store this CO2 in. We have abundant renewable energy. It does not make sense to, if a country or a region does not have vast renewable energy, to spend time in developing DAC and use renewable energy, small renewable energy capacity to do DAC. But in Kenya, we have vast amounts of renewable energy, and DAC can actually catalyze, can accelerate the deployment of more renewable energy here in Kenya. And lastly, we have talent. We have people, as I said, it's hardware. Hardware is something that needs people to build, to fix, to troubleshoot. And that's one of the things, one of the greatest gifts Kenya can give the world. We have the talent that can build this industry and actually scale it quickly. And so that's why we believe this is the best place to do it.
100%. So it's really the human capital actually here that is needed to implement the technology. Then,
Sorry. We have the greatest incentive to do this. As I said, climate change, we see it every day. It affects us in our daily lives. And so the incentive is there for us. And that's why Octavia is a team of 11 people. And all of those people are young people who just wake up every day with a commitment to solving the greatest problem of our time.
soon to double, right?
Yes, hopefully.
So, Lyndsay, what do you think about this? I mean, at the studio, is that something that you're actively working on, taking patents? And yeah, tell us more about your opinion on this.
So I think that, I think our definition of innovation at Factory is really kind of, or how we think about it is that the greatest kind of innovations at scale usually don't come from like one novel technology idea or one sole genius, but they come from bringing together a deep understanding of the problem, bringing together a technology that could solve that, or two, and creating a product from that, a new business model and great talent that really brings that to scale. So, so I think that when we think about where the technology comes from, that is less important to us. I think that the greatest climate technology innovations, some of them are going to come from, Western markets where they're putting $100 billion into clean tech. Some of them are going to come from India, where actually we've seen a lot of innovations get to scale. Some of them are going to come from Africa. We see M-Pesa has, kind of led the way. So I think that where the technology comes from is less important than what customers can and will pay for. So we just really like to focus on what solutions will customers pay for or will generate sustainable revenue, like Octavia. So I think that is kind of overall our philosophy. But I do think that we should be looking to academia and government programs and corporate programs around the world that are investing a lot in climate to figure out what climate solutions could be commercialized in Africa. So we do have a couple of ventures in the studio where we are actually licensing new technology in the United States that could actually transform yields. here in Africa. And I do think that bringing together those technologies with the right licenses and teams here that can build business models behind them is one way we should be thinking about having Africa lead the way in deploying climate solutions.
I completely agree. We're seeing that as well across our entire portfolio, and it's really about what will customers want, pay for, and how is that eventually going to scale here. So going now to, because I'm conscious of time, to the other very important point you made, which is how do we help entrepreneurs not waste time fundraising and actually building? I'd love to go to Aisha and Claire. You know, the climate tech sector, as defined by Maxime earlier, with the broad definition that it has today, only raised $1.2 billion, right, Maxime, last year, compared to other sectors is still much less. So what has been your experience as founders, and especially women founders? I mean, we saw it's still less than 2% of global funding going to women-led startups. So what has been your experience? Have you had challenges, or because, as you said, climate is a hot topic, it's actually been easier to raise funding? Like, tell us more.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Claire. Yeah, I'll go first with this. So yeah, it's definitely a challenging environment. I mean, beyond the trifactor of being female, being of a minority descent, and being on the continent, we also were, last year was a very challenging capital market space anyway, so even doubly challenging. That said, my approach to such a challenging scenario is looking for the very strategic investors that are willing to listen and understand the problem we're working on. So if you don't get it, I suppose I don't take it too personal. I just feel like you're probably not the right fit. But I think in the broader spectrum, though, it is a challenging environment to raise money, and that's why the focus on strategic investors like Catalyst Fund, who actually took the time to work with us and understand the business model, give us a lot of advice, how to structure, and even the venture building, which has actually been more valuable than the cash, is what we. I guess it's kind of like the easing the wound, in the sense where meeting such a strategic investor that can help you grow your business and understands the problem. It's not saying climate just for the sake of it, but actually understands the real reasons why you need venture building support, you need partners, and really trying to start cutting that cost down makes it worthwhile. I do hope that more folks like actually fund crops up, because I know that you guys can't fund all the women or fund everybody in the space. But yeah, it's a challenging space for sure. That said, I do think there's some silver linings in there to look to. Yeah.
Just fundraising, but actually fundraising from the right investors, strategically aligned, that can really help you grow.
I always say, not every dollar is equal, so
No,
I'd rather get a dollar from someone who understands the business and really can help scale the business, because money will run out. You do need support in other areas other than cash.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah. And Claire, what about you? What do you think?
I am hugely excited about the amount of attention that's going towards climate. I think us being in the here and now, next year, you can imagine how more investors want to invest in climate. I think the investors coming in now are sort of the early movers. We are the early movers. So I think it's a really exciting position to be in. I do see that, yes, investors don't always understand. We understand really specifically because we're working on it. So there are sometimes challenges, especially with food systems. There's not really an awareness of the amount of methane the food system produces. So explaining that and educating people in terms of what different impact we're having on climate change, as well as carbon credits, for example, which is very new. So we are working on carbon credits, and it surprises people because we're still educating. Like, they want to do a lot on climate change, carbon credits, but it's a whole new beast.
Right.
But I think it's a very exciting position to be in here now early, and the investors coming in early. To your point on female founders, I think I don't want to repeat the statistics that Maxime presented, but I think that's like another challenge that will last longer than, and I do want to address it because it was a very interesting session with Village Capital. They had a session at the Impact Fest, and they have a whole study in terms of how investors do the first screening of startups. And they found that all the questions asked to female founders were almost all risk-related. And questions asked towards male founders were growth-related. And it opened up my mind because I had no idea that they would ask growth questions. And I was in my fundraise. I get 80 to 90% risk questions, and maybe I would get a growth question. And I do want to, I think it's about raising awareness. I see me being here and doing this startup, part of my impact is also female founding companies. That's really important. If we want to solve mankind's greatest challenges, and we are funding 85% male-led organizations, I question the lived experience in the solutions we're funding, because 80% of smallholder farmers are women. It is, we need that lived experience to be able to solve those greatest challenges. So I think that study was great. They haven't released it yet officially, but anyway, so I wanted to add that. So I think there is that challenge for sure, and there has to be a little bit more transparency towards that.
Absolutely, it's so true. And it always comes up across all of our cohorts, and now we've invested in over 70 companies, and every time the women in the cohort say, look, it's always the risk questions. So audience, the first questions that you're going to ask is going to be about potential for growth to these women founders, okay? And I want to hear them all. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I guess a question I have too is, why do we ask different questions, and is there a way to maybe think more thoughtfully about standardizing some of the investment processes? So to kind of remove this unconscious bias. And I think that all of us investors really do need to do that. I think that we look at DEI in the workplace. Do we have, diversity and inclusion policies? And I think it would be very interesting for us to look at it in the investment processes and figure out where we can remove some of these differences, because it's not standardized. And I think that is leading to some of these challenges. The other thing too I will say is I've heard a lot of investors in this climate talking about the importance of companies that are more disciplined in driving to profitability and not kind of growing at all costs. I think that's we had a closed investor session yesterday. This was a big topic. And I will say that, female CEOs and founders are very good at driving businesses to profitability and being disciplined, and yet we're still not seeing more investment. So I find there to be a real inconsistency right now, and I think that as we look for solutions that customers adopt and companies that can grow in sustainable ways, I think now is the time to really see a meaningful shift in investing in women if this truly is the priority of investors.
Absolutely, and on that call to action, I know we only have a few minutes left. So before I ask all of them what their predictions are and what founders and investors in this room should be thinking about, let's see if there's a couple of questions from the audience. If you have them, raise your hands, because I can't see everybody. And stand up, maybe. Okay. Sorry, did you have a question? Great.
Yeah, my name is Madeline, co-founder, director, Adapter Earth. So we are helping farmers adapt to climate change, and I have just like 3 short comments. Lyndsay, you're spot on about women and driving companies to profitability. Right now, we are on our 18th month in operation, and actually the heartbeat of what I do as COO at Adapter is how do I now drive us to sustainable profitability. But I have a quick question for the gentleman, I think it's Anthony Kimani, the carbon guy. Duncan, sorry. So I'm just thinking about what you're doing. Sounds good, but not so sure about the cost, the cost of that, yeah? So maybe a little bit on that. And then my colleague from Nigeria, I think at Farm U, we have an idea that about production, floods, and everything you mentioned at the beginning, floods and droughts and such. We are all about climate adaptation mechanisms. So apart from ensuring that the buyers have timely, good volume, timely delivery, the Nestle's, timely delivery, good volumes, good quality, and consistency, at production, we can also partner and see how do we make sure that climate adaptation plans are in place for the farmers to make sure that production failure is kind of mitigated by adaptation mechanisms. Thanks.
All right, I'll go first. Sorry, I'll go first. Yeah, on the question of cost, yes, air captured CO2 is expensive, but again, DAC is a nascent industry, and we cannot judge a nascent industry by its costs now, but by what it could be in as we build and deploy it. And I'll go back to the analogy of solar. Solar was expensive 20 years ago, and no one thought that it would have been the cheapest form of energy that we have now. And it's going to be the same thing with DAC, and we have a very good blueprint that we can apply with what solar did, develop the global supply chains, build, deploy, learn, build again, and as we iterate, the costs will come down. And that's basically what we're doing here at Octavia.
Thank you for your comment. Yes, I think these sort of conversations are important, being able to collaborate with other companies in the ecosystem. We actually work with the Nature Conservancy, which is the largest regenerative nonprofit that is headquartered in the United States. And one of the key things we're looking at is how do farmers adapt? So going back to the example of the farmer that had experienced flood, already put in mitigation because the expectation is that there will be heavy rainfall the next time that he grows. So being able to harvest earlier and things like that. So yeah, I'll definitely be looking to chat after this conversation, but I do think just the wider sense is that yes, it's important to think about collaboration where we're not building in silos and everyone is really having these sort of conversations to see how we can address the problem that is going to affect us all.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Wangui Kanyaru. I'm a partner at ALN Kenya, a lawyer by profession. Thank you so much. This has been a fascinating panel. I have two questions. One is on the venture studio approach and the shared services model you're using. I'm just wondering to what extent those shared services include things like legal or regulatory advisory services, because for each sector that you've highlighted, there's such a complex regulatory environment in almost any country you'd be trying to operate in. If that conversation isn't had as early as possible, sometimes, further down the road is too little too late. So that's one question. But the other question I had was, still tied to the first one, in the context of the AFCFTA and the idea that these sort of venture studio approaches that are happening and starting in Kenya, I'm just curious to understand how you see regional integration as a potential game changer, or maybe nothing to see here yet because it just hasn't gone fast enough in terms of speed vis-a-vis all the sort of things that are actually happening on the ground. Thanks.
Thank you for your questions. I'll answer really quickly so that we can get to the last question. One, shared services such as legal are really critical for startups. Getting their legal right, getting their approach to regulation right, I think is absolutely critical, and they just can't afford full fee legal services. So I'm really proud to announce that recently we partnered with Wilson Sonsini, which is one of the top climate startup firms in Silicon Valley, and they're going to help all of our companies with their Delaware and their US kind of legal work. But we are looking for more partners here in Nairobi and Lagos. So if you're interested in supporting us on this front, let us know. I think we'll have a nice pipeline of future paying startups for you. On the second point about, actually, I really am glad you brought up this point about kind of African trade and kind of regional associations. I mean, one, I do think the more we can break down the national barriers across Africa to help companies scale Pan-African, it's really game-changing. I'm not in the policy sector, so I won't speak to the likelihood of that happening, but I will say that at Factory, we really believe in supporting companies to scale into multiple African markets and not be afraid of that, because it reduces risk, it increases it increases the size of the market in a way that I think is really important to achieve scale and profitability. So I will say we want to continue doing that as an industry. But I'll pass it back to you.
That's a strong alarm that the panel is over time. So to wrap it up, we won't have time to go into their deep insights, but please catch them all after the panel if you want to continue the conversation. I'll just ask one wrap-up question, and you're going to answer me yes or no. Do we think that the climate tech sector is going to be the #1 sector in Maxime's Africa the Big Deal database in terms of funding raised in 2023? Yes or no?
2030. That's not a yes or no, but I think in a couple of years, yes.
Okay, Lyndsay?
I think yes.
Great. Duncan?
It's not my area of expertise, but yes.
I think yes. Aisha?
I have to be clear, I'm not so optimistic. I'll say no.
No?
Based on what I've
Great.
seen.
Divided opinions. That's what we like. All right, a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening.